So recently, I finally got around to playing Mortal Kombat 1, which some of you may know, which inspired me to go through the entire trilogy of games that led up to it, which some of you also may know. Which just reaffirmed something for me. Mortal Kombat 11 has one of the most fascinatingly awful story modes in any game I've played. I'll go as far as to say it's the second worst time travel based story I've ever experienced.
This is seriously messed up.
Sadly, I've played through the story mode in this game more than any other story mode in MK history. Back in university, I remember complaining at one point about how expensive Switch games were, and then my friend told me to look at the deals section on the eShop. One of the first things that came up was MK11 for 85% off. And who am I to pass that up? Then I played the game twice. Sometime later, I played through the trilogy not once but twice, and recently I played through the trilogy again. So I've played this game 5 times, and it's really amazing how gradually but potently it sunk in for me just how bad the story is. And it should come as no surprise to any longtime fans of the series. There's probably a million videos like this on the topic already. But I just have to get my thoughts out there. That's how much this irks me. Modern Mortal Kombat struggles to write decent plot lines largely because they deliberately limit themselves via their structure. You have to constantly focus on different characters every half hour or so, and every chunk of the story has to find a way to contrive 4 fights in a row with the same character. Hence Geras showing up at the end of Sonya's chapter in this game apropos of nothing. And as shoehorned as that felt, complaining about that specific instance is like complaining about the moist towelettes in a crashing airplane. Point is, these games have difficult limitations to work with, but there are ways to make it work. Somehow though, even by those standards, the writing in this game is woeful. Okay, so we start off before the epilogue of MKX. This is actually a pretty cool scene in all honesty. When he purified the Jinsei chamber at the end of MKX, Raiden took a lot of Shinnok's evil energy into himself, which ended up corrupting him, making him become Dark Raiden, and the game opens up on him torturing Shinnok before decapitating him. I would say, if nothing else, the story is actually good in the first chapter, because this is where they're actually telling something coherent, interesting, and different from most of the rest of the series. Now that Raiden is evil, he's insisted on declaring all-out war against all other realms, assuming that they pose a threat towards Earthrealm. Not unreasonable, Earthrealm is this universe's bitch, but either way, this team of Special Forces operatives, led by Cassie Cage, Sonya Blade, and Jackie Briggs, are leading the charge. Where are they going? Straight into the Netherrealm. Opposing them are several of the remaining Revenants, including Liu Kang, Katana, Jade, and Cabal. They end up succeeding in their task of blowing up the Bone Temple, but in the process, Sonya Blade is killed. This right here is the perfect setup to a plot where Raiden would end up being the main villain. They just went on the offensive, completely unprompted at the insistence of Raiden, and in the process, lost a friend, a mother, a wife, and a great warrior. And if anything, Raiden seems happy about it.
Your mother died a warrior's death. May we all be so fortunate.
You did not just say that.
Unfortunately, this is where things fall apart in a hurry. This is where the real main villain, Chronica, reveals herself. Chronica is the keeper of time, and she believes in having a balance between good and evil, and now that Raiden has become too big for his britches, he's upset that balance, and as such, the keeper of time, Chronica, wants to reset the universe and remove him from the equation. The issue with Chronica conceptually is that she's way too overpowered. How do you fight a villain who has control over time itself? Well, if said villain is competent in any way, you can't. You have to introduce some sort of limitation that makes the conflict feasible. And they did introduce something along those lines, but completely unintentionally. Chronica is considered to some the worst villain in the history of Mortal Kombat. And there's a reason for that. It's because she's the dumbest character in the history of Mortal Kombat. She quite literally does everything in her power to make sure her plan doesn't succeed. Let's start off with the basics. In Chronica's Keep, she has a giant hourglass, which is the main thing that she uses to manipulate time. She can manipulate time by herself as well, but the degree to which is vague. Either way, she can't reset the timeline yet. You see, her crown is the control mechanism for the hourglass, and she needs to power it up using the souls of thousands of people. So she powers up her crown using a soul well on Shang Tsung's island. Then, once the crown is powered up, she can use it to reset time vis-a-vis the hourglass. Here's the issue. That is a plan which requires no assistance. Shang Tsung's island is abandoned, so assuming she can get there by herself, or with minimal help, she can power up her crown and get back to the keep without ever announcing her presence. At worst, she could have stopped at recruiting Revenant Liu Kang and Katana at the beginning of the game. If Chronica was determined to have other people do the job for her, they could have gone to the island for her and come back without anybody noticing. But instead of doing that, Chronica decides to raise an army of people from the past in order to help her along her way. And she does so in the most loud and public way possible. Now, aside from not needing most of these people's help, and aside from the fact that most of them aren't even actively involved in her plan other than dividing Raiden's forces among several conflicts, she also bafflingly brings people into the present who oppose her plans. As a matter of fact, she brings more people from the past into the present that oppose her than help her. She would have been better off bringing nobody from the past compared to what she does. I can't possibly think of how anybody could justify this as a plot point. She has mastery over space-time and is actively creating an army to oppose her. Plus, let's not pretend that her army even makes much sense to begin with. They seem to present the morality as black and white regardless of character dynamics or history. All the bad guys are working with Chronica and all the good guys are opposing her, even though certain combinations of characters on the evil side make no sense. Like Devora working with Shao Kahn and Baraka, even though Devora killed Baraka and she also killed Shao Kahn's daughter, Melina. They even bring this up, but even though Shao Kahn has never been one to turn down a fight, he's talked down by Chronica.
Devora is under my protection, Shao Kahn.
I don't give a shit.
I'm sorry, nobody is stopping him from killing someone if he's mad at them. He's killed his own allies for less. And the fact that Shao Kahn is just going along with all this feels wrong, because if there's one thing Shao Kahn is not, it's a follower. If anything, something tells me that Shao Kahn would be very keen to somehow find a way to kill Chronica and take her power for himself. Funnily, in the Aftermath DLC, he does turn against Chronica, but not because he's deceitful and power-hungry, but because she failed to stop his throne from being usurped.
Chronica? Where was she when Kitana stole my throne? We'll make a joke on her empty promises.
Either way, all of these oil and water personalities are bad guys, so therefore they work together without issue. That's Vince McMahon era WWE logic. The fact that she would even bring this combination of characters together is stupid of her, but the fact that they actually work together is even stupider. Then we also have to consider that these characters are following Chronica for what? The promise of having great power and influence in the next timeline?
I offer a greater empire in the new era, Shao Kahn.
But these people realize it's not literally them that's reaping the benefits, right? It's gonna be a new version of them, a pastiche. Why would I give up my life just so another version of myself can reap the benefits? At that point, it's basically a completely different person than me benefiting. So it comes across as odd that anybody would go along with her at all. But after all that, there's still one absolutely titanic plot hole in Chronica's plan. The whole impetus for her wanting to reset time and try again is because of Raiden, the version of Raiden that upset the balance of power. Well, as it turns out, two versions of the same god cannot exist in the same point in time simultaneously. And as a result, Chronica brings forth a version of Raiden from earlier in the timeline, and as a result, the modern version of Raiden ceases to exist. And you know what that means? First of all, they throw away an entire plotline that could have been great. And second of all, the whole impetus for the plot literally ceases to exist in Chapter 2 of 12. Basically making the whole plot feel completely pointless. If nothing else, the idea of evil Raiden facing off against the Keeper of Time who's trying to erase him, two equally horrible and insane deities fighting against each other with the entire cast of characters caught in the middle, that could have been good. But they completely deflate whatever stakes it has long before anything could have come of it. So to recap, we have a really terrible antagonist whose only nerf is the unintentional fact that she's so stupid. You have a bunch of minions working with the main antagonist whose motivations and dynamics make no sense, an army of people working against her that she herself summoned, and the whole impetus for her plan is in the game for all of one chapter before vanishing. That's the foundation of the story, and it only gets worse from there. Following this, there's a significant portion of the story where Chronica takes a backseat and lets her minions do what they need to do. Largely, they're raising an army, which is merely an extension to the pointlessness of her plan, because she wouldn't need an army if she was smart. Either way, Chronica doesn't get personally involved until a ways through the story. You see, there's a moment where the present version of Scorpion dies, and the past version of Scorpion is then convinced to be good via present Scorpion. So past Scorpion tries to help Raiden and his crew, except Raiden doesn't trust him, and in the process of trying to smite him, briefly turns evil, and even briefly attempts to fight Liu Kang in a parallel of what happened in MK9. But then, he has a vision of several timelines where these exact events took place. It seems that for some reason, Liu Kang and Raiden are always destined to fight. Fate wills it. Turns out it has to do with Chronica deliberately weaving fate so the two of them would always be at odds, because together they are collectively powerful enough to defeat Chronica.
Your combined power threatens my vision for the timeline.
Which is cool except for one issue. That means that Chronica has done the timeline reset like 1,000,000 times and has never gotten it right. Things always fall into the same issues, and only now has she decided to make a reality without Raiden. How the hell has she managed to fail at her task so many times when she has power over the space-time continuum and could theoretically shape it however she wants? It doesn't make her seem menacing or more impressive, it makes her come across as a perennial dumbass for being completely unable to do her single job that she was literally made to do. And apparently Raiden keeps realizing her manipulation on his own volition because they keep having the same conversation, allegedly.
Liu Kang and I will not be divided further by your machinations.
Oh, Raiden. Do you think this is the first time you made that vow? We have repeated this exact conversation so often in so many timelines.
Like, okay, she always wins, but why does it ever get this far? And why is it only now that she wants to shake things up? Then bafflingly, she decides that since Raiden and Liu Kang aren't going to kill each other, she kidnaps Liu Kang and brings him to her keep. I'm sorry, but if she can just warp people at will, why doesn't she just do that? Why doesn't she just, I don't know, warp everyone into the middle of the bottomless blood ocean that's introduced in this game? Seriously, what's stopping her from making everything about her plan 1,000,000 times easier? She had the ability to end everything in a second. Is it the fact that she's done this so many times it's like a speedrunner deciding to add arbitrary conditions to their run? Does her power have limitations? Or is she just a complete and utter moron? And the most hilarious thing about this is, the only, and I mean literally only reason why there's a version of Liu Kang and Raiden in this timeline that are aligned to begin with and have to be turned against each other is because she brought them here. The versions of the two of them that existed in this reality hated each other. If the two of them collectively are the only thing powerful enough to defeat her, everything that happens here is entirely her fault. Like, how could you be so stupid? The amount of self-sabotage is just infuriating. Then again, it is a fight to the bottom in this game to try and find the biggest idiot. For example, Jax. I can see what they were going for here, but I still find it incredibly frustrating. So in the previous game, it's casually mentioned that Jax disapproved of his daughter Jackie joining the Special Forces, but now in this game, he's going through a rough patch because he lost his wife. And Chronica takes advantage of this grief, not to create a world in which he still has a wife, but rather to create a world in which his daughter isn't part of the Special Forces.
More importantly, your daughter was not to serve, nor endure the same tragedies you have.
Summary being that he joins the bad guys and decides he's gonna throw away the entire world just because he thinks he knows what's best for his daughter better than his own daughter does. And what he thinks is best for his daughter is my grandchildren.
Your home should be filled with grandchildren. Help me, and it will be.
Like, the wife thing is understandable. That's probably enough for an already traumatized man to go over the edge and decide he'd rather reset everything than continue on. But the entire story after that plays up the daughter thing. And however justified his motivation is, it's frustrating to watch a story of someone deciding to destroy everything to make a decision for their own child when that child has already decided what they want. His own past self is a better father than he is. And the whole reason he decides to go back on the fight is because it's revealed that Chronica is Shinnok's mother, revealing that she's not to be trusted.
Chronica's promises to you are a cruel deception. She is the mother of Shinnok, the architect of your revenant enslavement.
He never has to confront the fact that his motivation is completely wrong, completely manipulative, and completely egotistical. I know what's best for you better than you do. Like hell he does. And then there's the Shao Kahn subplot. Okay, so Kotal Kahn was the official new ruler of Outworld as of the previous game. But with Shao Kahn back in the picture, Shao is gunning for the throne. So Jade and Kotal have to hunt him down before he has the chance. Now it turns out that Kotal is incredibly racist towards Tarkatans for opposing him during his rise to power, and as such, while he and Jade are searching a refugee camp, he flips out and tries to execute some of them for info on where Shao Kahn is. Let me be clear here. They know that Shao Kahn and his crew are somewhere in the village, and while what he's doing is horrible, the last thing you need to do in this situation is make yourself more vulnerable. But that's what Jade does. She fights Kotal and knocks him out just in time for Shao Kahn to show up and both of them to get captured. Noble as her intentions were, there was no worse time to take a stand. But then again, I also blame Kotal because there are plenty of times where you can exercise your prejudices, but there's probably no worse time than when you're on the search for one of the most powerful villains you've known or will ever know. What ensues is a desperate blitz to try and stop Shao Kahn's coup and save Kotal. But here's the thing. Shao Kahn had proven himself to be an undefeatable behemoth in Mortal Kombat 9. The type of guy who faced death multiple times but refused to stay down. A guy who required the power of the Elder Gods to keep down. And even then, just barely. Somehow, Shao Kahn is soloed by Kitana. That's bullshit. There's a very short list of people who should be able to solo Shao Kahn, and Kitana had not proven herself to be at that power level. It would be like Green Arrow defeating Darkseid. Wait, you're telling me that actually happened? Point is, as cool of a moment as this was for Kitana, it just makes no sense. So basically, the story arc begins with a major contrivance, ends with a major contrivance, and features two characters competing for the title of dumbest character in the story. Also, in keeping with a recurring trend in these games, she just blinds him. She doesn't kill him even though he's clearly too dangerous to be left alive. Yeah, that's something that generally irritates me about these games. Characters being in the position to be able to kill someone who really should be dead, but for one reason or another, they just don't. Like how in MK9, Liu Kang punches through Shao Kahn's stomach, but come on. These people have mastery over the mystical arts. If he's not undisputedly dead, stomp on his head until he resembles Conquest. Then there's D'Vorah. To be clear, I'm a lot more forgiving of D'Vorah in these games than most fans. Sure, she killed a few fan-favorite characters and clearly had a bit of plot armor on account of being a character the writers really liked, but come on, how else are you gonna make a character a big deal without making them do big things? But anyways, Raiden's forces need to get across the Blood Sea, so they need to enlist the help of the Blood Sea ferryman, Charon. Like in Greek mythology, just with a K instead of a C, like, you know, the rest of the series. But instead of making him an offer he couldn't refuse in order to prevent him from helping them, Chronica has D'Vorah torture the guy, ensuring that once he's free, he's gonna help you take down Chronica. Who else is an egregious idiot in this game? Well, we can't discount the previous version of Sonya Blade, who finds out that her present version is dead, and she has a reaction on the level of finding out the fast food place just got your order wrong.
Son of a bitch. Seriously?
That's not the problem with the game, though. That's just an issue with Ronda Rousey having the acting skill of a shoe. Boy, her star's fallen in recent years, hasn't it? But anyways, she gets mad at Cassie for abandoning her in the Netherrealm.
Damn it, Cassie! You abandoned me?
To save the company! That was my order!
Who the hell gave you that order?
You did!
Isn't she a military commander in the point of the timeline she came from? Doesn't she know how these things work? Or, you know, couldn't she have just read for 2 more seconds and found out that present Sonya Blade was the one giving the directions? Except, later she does.
But I reread the file. You followed orders. Saved your squad.
When did you read the rest of the report? You got mad at her right before the place got invaded. She wouldn't have had a chance. At this point, it should become clear that seemingly Chronica is determined to let Raiden and his crew win. Meanwhile, Raiden and his crew are almost determined to let Chronica win. It's a frustrating journey of two sides self-sabotaging as hard as they can. Then there's just a lot about the game that doesn't make any sense. First and foremost, the time travel. They can't decide if this series has the type of time travel based in multiverse theory or single timeline theory. For example, Raiden gets told by the Elder Gods that our choices are ours to make, and he can still correct his path, especially now with the knowledge of where his actions lead, implying multiverse theory.
Of time will not predetermine your destiny. That is for you to shape.
But then they also establish that injuries to past versions of yourself affect the present version, which is an indication of a single unbroken timeline because it implies it's the same person, but it can't be the same person because simply them being there changes their paths. And therefore, the hypothetical single unbroken timeline would have been broken, meaning their future selves would cease to exist in the timeline as we've seen it. Oh, and there goes my brain. If you're in a linear timeline, your future version is the exact same version of yourself, just in the future, where if you're working with multiverse theory, the different versions of you are temporal clones, and they seemingly can't decide which of these rules to follow. For example, the ability to harm your present self by harming your past self is most well established when Sonya Blade murks Kano. But even then, this is inconsistent, like when Johnny Cage beats himself up and comes out unharmed. And the same thing happens at multiple other points in the game where characters will beat up on their past selves but come out completely unharmed. Even though it's shown in this Kano scene that even punching your past self hurts your present self. And most egregiously, you have Revenant Liu Kang absorbing the soul of his past self, making him Super Liu Kang. So injuring your past self seemingly only applies when they feel like it. Although if it's you injuring your past self, you know what, that's too many layers deep. So what are the time travel rules? Basically, there are none. It's just what they feel like at the current moment. And if we want to talk about inconsistency, what does it mean to be immortal in this series? Because someone like Charon, the immortal sailor, is shown to be immune from death by physical trauma. But then Raiden, for all intents and purposes, is immortal. They even say as much.
As an immortal, I exist outside the normal laws of time.
But he can still die from physical trauma. But if a minor god like Raiden is functionally immortal, then what does it say about the Elder Gods? Shinnok gets decapitated but is still alive. But then sometime through the game, the other Elder Gods are killed off, including Centurion, who gives up her life force to Chronica. If Shinnok is impossible to kill, why aren't they? And if Shinnok is immortal, then what does that say about Chronica? Shouldn't she be like, super immortal? Nope, she still dies. And then there's Geras, a newly introduced character in the game. He regenerates every time he's wounded, and they probably did this so the game could have a slightly higher inconsequential body count, but then spoilers, in the Aftermath DLC, Shao Kahn just smashes his head until it's a pile of blood and brains, and we never see him after that, even though he previously exploded. So what, did he regenerate off screen and just never show up again? Because it seems like this was pretty final. Seriously, who can and can't die is the most arbitrary thing in a game and indeed a trilogy with a lot of arbitrary BS. Or how about this for something that doesn't make any sense? We find out that the Elder God Centurion is working with Chronica, and once again she even gives her life force to Chronica to power her up. But for some reason, Centurion is the Elder God that communicates to Raiden what he needs to do.
You must find Chronica's key and gain control of her hourglass. Only then will time's momentum be restored.
How does that make any sense? I guess later they explain that her heart wasn't really into it, but surely this is during a part of the story where she's trying to upkeep the viability of Chronica's plan. And then the final of the things that make absolutely no sense, manipulation of time. Faint of praise as this may come across, Raiden does the most intelligent thing anybody does in the game and merges himself with the version of Liu Kang who absorbed the essence of his past self, giving him a triple whammy of power. But then, right when he reaches Chronica, she's able to reset time. But because Liu Kang is a god, she's not able to manipulate time around him. Doesn't this directly contradict with something that happened earlier in the game where they established that she reset time many times, and Raiden was none the wiser? So clearly he's been reset already. But now she can't do it, even though all he's done is transfer his power to Liu Kang? Furthermore, if she can't reset time around godly beings, then what the hell is even the point of her plan? If she can manipulate time around immortal beings, then Liu Kang not being affected makes no sense. If she can't, her plan makes no sense. Like, could I get an explanation for the... Oh, she's dead.
But wait! There's more!
Then we get to the Aftermath DLC, which turns an already incoherent, nonsensical, plot hole-ridden story with every shade of stupid character possible into an even more incoherent, nonsensical, plot hole-ridden, etc. Now, I know a lot of people are very fond of the Aftermath DLC, but I actually think that this part of the story is actually the worst part of the story, because it breaks every single rule further than was already broken. So we start at the beginning of time with Liu Kang and a now human Raiden attempting to create a new timeline, only for Shang Tsung, Nightwolf, and Fujin to pop out of a void beyond space and time, a place where all three of them were put by Chronica after they refused to help her. Turns out a new timeline can't be forged without Chronica's crown, which was destroyed in the fight. They can't risk going back to the fight with Chronica because they risk breaking the crown again, even though they have functionally unlimited tries. So they need to go back into the current timeline to get the crown without otherwise changing the time stream. So I'm going to categorize everything that's wrong with this part of the story. So first of all, Chronica had a void beyond space and time where she put all of 3 people who opposed her plans. A void which only opened when she died. So if she had to summon people who opposed her plans, why didn't she put them in there instead of 3 arbitrary people? Second of all, I can't remember if it's established here or if it's established in the next game, but either way, it's established at some point that Titans like Chronica exist beyond space-time, and therefore when they die, they can't be brought back even by time travel, and yet Chronica is still alive in the past. Third, they make a big deal about how they need to recruit the help of Sindel because she wasn't involved in the final battle, therefore recruiting her wouldn't alter the timeline at all. But by about the halfway point of the DLC, any pretense about not altering the timeline is completely dropped, as they freely and deliberately go into completely uncharted territories.
Now that we have this, we're in uncharted territory. We've changed this timeline for good.
Correct.
This one has a possible explanation though. It's possible that Shang Tsung was bullshitting because he had his own plans that he was working on. But fourth of all, and this is the most important part, the only reason why Liu Kang even wants to create a new timeline to begin with is because the current one was destroyed. Yet now it's retroactively established that Liu Kang can send people back into the past, which in this case is the future, via the current timeline. So my question at this point is, if you can do that, what's even the point of getting the crown to begin with? Why would you create a new timeline if you can just call a mulligan as many times as you want? What if Liu Kang sends everybody back in time before the battle with Chronica and then do a 10-on-1 beatdown of her, destroy the crown, and now there's no need for a new era at all? At some point, they switched from creating a new era because they needed to creating a new era because they wanted to. So those 4 gaping plot holes are the basis of the entire Aftermath DLC. Those are just some of the issues this DLC has from its premise alone. There's plenty of issues even once the game starts, like how they make a big deal out of not being seen, lest they risk altering the timeline, then they're immediately discovered. In fact, Liu Kang warps them into a public area where they would have 0 chance of not being seen. Then there's their attempts to speedrun the story of the main game, leading to a laughably rushed version of established events, or how Sindel is so obviously putting on an act it's kind of insulting.
Trust that I loved your father, Jared. Trust that I love you.
Or how they undo the plot point about Kotal Khan being crippled in his fight with Shao Kahn by using a restoration chamber that suddenly exists. If he could restore his broken spine, that really takes away the impact of him abdicating his throne because of his injury when he could have just used the restoration chamber. I have a feeling that this was done just so they could have an excuse for you to fight him one more time and showcase biblically accurate Kotal Khan, that is to say getting his ass kicked. Then again, they probably also established it to give a reason why Shao Kahn was able to regain his sight, but given how keen they are to kick Kotal's ass in these games, I can't decide which would be the more important reason. Then there's the moment where the unbeatable Shiva dies in the most unceremonious way possible, to the point that I didn't even know she was dead, and somehow, despite being found next to the corpse in the most suspicious way possible, Sindel gets away with blaming Kitana on Shiva's death, which makes the entire Shokan tribe turn on Kitana without a second thought, and nobody stopping to think, huh. This seems like a rather convenient explanation, especially if someone were, I don't know, trying to usurp their daughter for the throne. Sadly, this DLC actually does come with some really cool stuff. As contrived as it may have been, there's an entire chapter where you play as Shao Kahn and Sindel absolutely wrecking the good guys. They even retcon why Cassie Cage was able to beat Shinnok.
You know I toasted Shinnok, right?
Ha! Shinnok schemed because he was worthless in battle. That you beat him only proves that truth.
I'm not sure if that passes the sniff test because the dude was in his ultra form, but at the very least it explains how a human could beat a god. And I will admit the ending twist is really cool. Liu Kang couldn't risk being affected by his past version being injured, and so sent everyone back in time, and then he locked himself in the void beyond time and space in order to cut himself off from any ill effects of the current timeline. Then as soon as Chronica was defeated again, he emerged ready to fight. Even though the entire plot getting to this point was riddled with holes, and the whole thing about Shang Tsung having to carry the crown to the end because he was the only one powerful enough to possess the crown was way down on the list of viable plans because it's risky as hell, that was really cool. It doesn't make up for the nonsensical bullshit that led to that point, but at the very least it ends strong. And if nothing else, gave them a blank slate for whatever came next, so they didn't have to be bogged down with any of the baggage they had created throughout the entire trilogy. And if you want to get some more or less tangential thoughts on Mortal Kombat 1, you can check this video out. It's not so much about the game being bad, but it's more so about the game being pointless in the face of the writer's unwillingness to get past certain tropes even after resetting the universe. But even then, Mortal Kombat 11 is one of the worst stories I've ever seen in any media. It is a dumpster fire that only gets worse the more you think about it, and in that respect, it's in a rare spot, as I can only think of one other story that's bad enough that you could theoretically continue to dig forever and never find the bottom. What I've said in this video could very well be scratching the surface because there's probably a lot of things I didn't even notice. And I'm willing to bet some people will question why it even matters so much because, you know, there are a number of nitpicks here. But I feel like there's a stigma against picking nits in criticism. For me, it's about volume. If there are a few minor issues you have, then it doesn't really matter. For example, there's a scene in that new Superman movie where the robot turns to the other robot and says that Superman finds the footage of his parents comforting, but like, there'd be no reason for the other robot not to know that. It's purely for the audience's sake that he says that, and to set up the scene at the end of the movie. But I find the movie so generally enjoyable that these things don't matter to me. Meanwhile, MK11 is one of those stories where the story pretty much fails on a fundamental level. A plot that makes no sense and is constantly undermining itself, a villain who's a complete moron and constantly undermines herself, characters acting irrationally stupid. When you take the sum of the parts and see that there are equal parts major and minor issues, it only puts the minor issues in sharper relief because the story is bad enough that I can't ignore the minor issues because they only make the major issues worse and vice versa. I'm not going to deny the fact that Mortal Kombat is the type of series that doesn't really need to have deep, interesting, and in-depth stories, but they still insist on doing the stories nonetheless. The amount of production value in the story modes is second to none, so clearly they care enough to make it a major focus. And all I'm asking for at this point is a story that's fun, simple, makes sense, and gets its points across without gaping holes and inconsistencies. I don't believe that's much to ask for. Despite their issues, I quite like the story modes in MK9 and 10, so it's like, do better or just stop doing story modes. Besides, nobody ever says the story doesn't matter if the story's good anyway, so the point is moot. That's all I've got. If you like this video and want to support the channel, you can leave a like, comment telling me what you think, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing. I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.